Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for allowing me to be here today.
Smile, Kenny.
I think what I'll do is just kind of stay out here and kind of wander around a little bit. I'm an educator by trade, right? I grew up as a teacher and then became an administrator and ultimately now the superintendent. And I know that any good teacher starts out with making sure that you understand what the objective is for the day. And my objective for today really is just to inform you on what the bond issue, the impending bond issue looks like. That is not to sway you to vote for or against. That's not my purpose. My purpose is just to give you facts so that when you do vote, you know what it is you're voting. So that's my goal here today.
Can you get a little closer there?
Yep, I can.
Thank you.
Thank you. My goal really today is information. It's to get through my presentation in about 20 minutes. That's to have a little fun in the process and then answer any questions that you have of me. And I'll stay as long as you would like me to. I'll make sure your questions get answered. So let me start by saying, so this morning I'm thinking, I always try to figure out how do I get things kicked off? What do I do? So today I'm speaking at the Democratic Forum, and who do I know that maybe could give me some advice here? When I started, for any of you who were at my first meeting 3 years ago, about now, when I first came to South Dakota, my 7th day on the job, I was part of the Blue Ribbon Task Force. So, which was a blessing in disguise for me. It really was. I got to meet a lot of people who were fun to meet. I got to learn a lot about the state financial system, as I had come from Nebraska, and I got to learn quite a little bit about how politics work in Pierre. So that was it was kind of fast forward, fast feed on that whole issue. But in that process, I got to meet a guy from Burke, South Dakota, by the name of Billy Sutton, through that Blue Ribbon Task Force. And occasionally, lawmaker Sutton would text me during the session and say, "What do you think about this?" In fact, one night, I'm sitting in my recliner, and I get a phone call, and I don't recognize the number. And on the other end was Billy Sutton. And he was talking to me about an issue that I didn't necessarily agree with him on in terms of what was going to happen, or what his thoughts were in terms of a state aid piece of the Blue Ribbon Task Force. And he was kind, he was articulate, he welcomed everything I had to say, and he disagreed with me, and he got it through the way he wanted it anyway. And when he did, I texted him and I said, "Well done, Senator," and he sent me a smiley face back. I thought that guy's influential, he's impressive, and whether you're going to vote for Billy Sutton or not, I know this: he's a tremendous person. And this morning when I texted him and said, "Speaking to the Democratic Forum at noon today, what should I say?" And he said, "Just tell everybody that I'm a staunch advocate for education in South Dakota." So I'm certainly not here speaking on behalf of Billy Sutton. Just know that we had a dialogue this morning, and what a tremendous person I think he is. So let's get to the real reason that I'm here today, and that's to speak to you about the bond issue that's coming up. In fact, it's 4.5 weeks away. 4 weeks from next Tuesday is that election. And let's start with just the why. Why did we even begin the process of having a conversation about new facilities in the Sioux Falls School District? And I would tell you that the primary purpose for the conversation was our continuing enrollment growth in the school district. That was part of it. The other part of it is the capacities that we have in the schools that already exist, and what does the future hold. So let me give you just a little bit of an idea of what our enrollment has done over the last generation. I like to have conversations in terms of generations. What does it look like? One generation ago, about 1991, Our school system was just over 15,000 students. I forget the exact number, it's like 15,100 something. I have it on the slide. But 15 plus thousand students in the school district. Today, we're just under 24,000 students in the school district. In that one generation in the city of Sioux Falls, we've grown by about 8,700 students. Now, to put that in context, if those 8,700 students were their own school district, they would be the third largest school district in the state of South Dakota. Just our growth in one generation is larger than every school district with the exception of Sioux Falls or Rapid City. So our growth is really a part of it. The second piece then, when we looked at that was, well, what does the future look like? What does the future growth look like? And we brought in folks from the city to help us with where the growth will be inside the school district boundaries. And we looked at live birth rate statistics from Minnehaha County. And I can tell you projections on enrollment are incredibly important to us because that's how state aid is calculated. So we don't ever want to miss the mark on that projection too far, whether that's high or low. We don't want to miss the mark on that. We believe that over the next 5 years, and that's really all we can project, the births that we have, over the next 5 years, that we'll grow by about another 1,000 students in the school district. And I think that's a very conservative projection. If you look at our growth over time, we grow by about 200 to 500 students annually inside the school district. So to think that we're going to grow by about another 1,000 students over the next 5 school years is really a very reasonable projection, I think. So those are the kids we have coming into our school system. Those kids clearly impact the elementary situation that we have. But when we project our middle school population and our high school population, we can really do those projections by those kids who already live in the city of Sioux Falls, already go to the Sioux Falls School District. Certainly we'll have some in-migration and some out-migration. But we did an exercise where we looked at our middle schools, 3 grades, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And we compared that 3-grade enrollment number, let's call that number X, with our first 3 grades, kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade. And if those kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd graders were magically 6th, 7th, and 8th graders today, we'd have to find seats for another 478 students in our middle schools. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the ability we have to house those students today. If we do that same exercise at the high school, our last 4 grade levels, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, and we call that Y, that number we call it Y, we compare that to our first 4 grade levels, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. We would have to add 1,144 seats to our current high schools, and that's really problematic for us. I'll tell you why that's problematic for us. When we look at our facility utilization, I've got a chart that shows this really well. If you can think of this, we have 24 elementary schools, and those 24 elementary schools are housed in 22 buildings. You might say, what? That doesn't make sense. But we have the Challenge Center and Robert Frost in one building. Okay, so we have 2 scenarios where we have 2 schools inside of one building. So we have 22 buildings, 24 elementaries. Of those 22 elementary schools, 18 of the 22 are at or are over capacity currently today. We have 5 middle schools. Of the 5 middle schools, 4 of the 5 are at or are over capacity today. I'll give you a story about one of those middle schools. Memorial Middle School, on the western edge of our community. Memorial Middle School has over 1,300 students at Memorial, and that number may be just a number to you, so let me provide a little context to that number. The 3 largest schools in the state of South Dakota, in order, are Roosevelt High School, Lincoln High School, and Washington High School. The next 2 largest schools, and I forget the order here, it's Rapid City Central and Rapid City Stevens. The 6th largest school in the state of South Dakota is Memorial Middle School. It's larger than Harrisburg High School, Brandon Valley High School, Watertown High School, Aberdeen Central High School. It's larger than any other high school in the state. So it just gives you an idea how large Memorial Middle School is. A very large middle school. And I would tell you that not only is Memorial is the most pronounced school we have at the middle level that's over capacity, but we're also over capacity at Patrick Henry and at Edison and at Whittier. So while it is the most pronounced in terms of being overpopulated, it's not our only school that's overpopulated. At the high school level, we have, I've already mentioned, the three largest high schools in the state, with Roosevelt being the largest by about 500 students over the second largest school. So Roosevelt is way over capacity, and Roosevelt administration this year is going to do some creative things in terms of making sure that all 2,300 plus of those kids get the best education that they can get. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of where our buildings are in terms of their functional capacity. So if we go from there, then we think about what about the buildings that we already have in place? Are they functioning at the pace that we want them to? Let me look at my slides here for just a minute. That's okay. No, don't worry about it. That's okay. So it's easy to define the problem. The problem is enrollment growth that's coming into our schools, and capacity within our schools. So that part's easy to define. One of the things we did as a school district was talk to our board about this issue over time, and then it was last August of 2017 at a work session, where we put together a series of events and some goals to talk about, well, what does this look like going forward? Now, one of the things that we wanted to do was make sure that we identified the issues, and I've identified most of those for you already. And number two, really engage the community in what a potential solution could be. The problem is easy to define. The solution's the hard part. How can we put together a solution that as a community we can say yes or no to? And what that consisted of was a number of community engagement opportunities. We took this information out, and we had public meetings at the Instructional Planning Center and at Washington High School, at Lincoln High School, and at Roosevelt High School. We had three community meetings, and I think it was in February, it might have been in March. And from there, we took the information we had not only had dialogue and feedback from folks in those meetings, we had an opportunity for them to fill out information and give it to us at that point. We took that information, and those were well publicized. If you were paying attention, you're probably well aware of those meetings. We took that, and from there we put together a task force of 30 people from the community. And we tried to have that task force represent our community both demographically and geographically, and really put in front of them the problems. As I said, it's easy to define the problems. And really charge that group with coming up with some solutions for our board to consider, and then ultimately for the community to consider. What that group did over a meeting of 4 meetings, those were all public meetings. Maybe some of you were there, and we broadcast those as well. I believe they're still on the website if you want to go back and revisit any of those. Really, that task force came out with a lot of information, but you can put that information really down into 4 areas that they said we really needed to address. They said, number 1, we need a new high school. Number 2, we need a new middle school. Number 3, we need a new elementary school. And number 4, we need upgrades in safety, security, accessibility, and equity throughout our district. So let me talk a little bit about each one of those 4 as they recommended to the Board of Education. The first topic, the high school, they said get that built, and get it built as quickly as you can build it. The quickest we can build that would be to open it up in the fall of 2021. So 3 years from now would be the soonest we can, and that might even be a little bit ambitious. We don't know yet how that design development would go, et cetera, et cetera. So if the bond issue would pass, we would get on that topic right away. The other thing that they said on the high school was that it should go in the northwest quadrant of our community. Part of the task force, we had help from the city. We had Mark Cotter and Mike Cooper from the city help us in terms of our planning. they're the folks that seem to know where the development is going to be. And they said from a school district standpoint, the primary areas that you're going to grow are in the northwest quadrant of the school district and the southwest quadrant of the school district. So when we look at those two areas, number one, we're looking at a high school somewhere in that northwest quadrant of the community. One other thing that has received quite a little bit of attention is a generous gift that potentially the district would receive from Sanford. And that gift is of 35 acres plus the ability to purchase 10 more acres to build a school. And one of the questions I get frequently on that is, are there any other stipulations tied to that land? And there isn't. There aren't naming rights. Those sorts of things are not attached to that. The only thing that is attached to that gift would be that we have to build a school on that property. So we couldn't build a bus barn on that property, couldn't build a superintendent's office on that property. It has to be a school. Could be a high school, could be a middle school, could be an elementary school, or it could be a combination of those. So we would have 45 acres available to us there, with 35 of those being gifted to us. The next question that comes when I'm talking about that particular issue is, does it make sense to build land there, and are you going to build a high school there? And I would tell you that the answer is we will vet many opportunities in the northwest quadrant of our community, and we're not simply vetting the potential gift from Sanford. It is a generous gift, it is a good gift, and it may very well be, if there's a high school built, it may very well be where we would build that high school. But I would tell you we won't do that without vetting all of our options. And I know for sure right now we have at least 3 options that would meet the guidelines set out by the task force, which would be build that in the northwest quadrant of the community. So what we'll do is we'll vet the pros and cons of every facility, every potential building site. So you think of the Sanford land. By the way, if you don't know where that is, if you think of Ramkota and you think of the Pentagon and you think of Westport that connects those, it's about halfway between Ramkota and the Pentagon. There are some great things about that. Number one, nobody else is offering to give us land. And those who own land in the northwest quadrant, they're very proud of it. So there's certainly a cost factor there. We estimate that the value of that gift would be about $3 million. It's incredibly generous. I can't state that enough. But I would also say that the cost of the building is estimated to be $84.7 million. And we would plan to live in that building for a long, long time. So when you take that $3 million and you compare it to a total cost of $84.7, or you compare it to the length of time you're going to live in that building, I don't think that $3 million gift should hamstring us to absolutely build on that land. But I think it should require us to vet it and vet it really well. Will we build on that land if the bond issue passes? Maybe. And I honestly don't know more than maybe today. Not even trying to be coy there. I can tell you there are 2 other parcels of land that look good to us as well. So that's the high school topic. The middle school topic.
Are you taking questions after, or?
I could do both, but it might be best if we do it after.
Okay.
The second piece was the middle school. The middle school topic, the task force said build that in the southeast quadrant of the community. And I can tell you when I heard that, I went, really? I just told you how overcrowded Memorial Middle School is. But when I started thinking through the logic behind the southeast quadrant, it made some sense. Number one, remember where the city planners said we're growing. Northwest quadrant, southeast quadrant. Number two, if you can picture this, picture our school district as a box. Now divide that box into thirds. Think of the westernmost third of that box, our school district. We have 2 facilities there, 2 middle school facilities there. We have McGovern and we have Memorial. Think of the middle third of that box. We have 3 middle schools there. We have Whittier, we have Patrick Henry, and we have Edison. Think of the easternmost third of that box, and we don't have any middle schools there. So I think from a long-term perspective, also remember that while I said Memorial is over capacity, I also said, so is Patrick, so is Whittier, and so is Edison. So we've got an issue to address there, district-wide. It's not just a western boundary issue in the city of Sioux Falls. So that would be the middle school protocol, is to build in the southeast quadrant. Also, they said if you can, get that building built by 2021, the same time frame as the high school. It won't take quite as long to put a middle school together, but it will still be pretty ambitious. Also, when you think of all the construction we have going on in the community, if we're building a high school and if we're building a middle school, at some point in time you put a real tax on the availability of folks to build those buildings as well. So we would build those as soon as we could if a bond issue passes. The third component was a new elementary school. The new elementary school did not have a geographical designation, so we would look there to see where does it make the most sense to build an elementary school. And I can tell you at this point, we don't have land, and we're not vetting any land for a middle school at this, or for an elementary school at this point. So no real thought today as to where that would go. The fourth component of the task force recommendations was an issue of security, safety, accessibility, and equity. Let me talk to you. I think safety and security probably are somewhat obvious to you, but I would tell you we have Bob Bray, a retired two-star Major General Bob Bray, who he leads the security component of our school district. And the first thing that we have to have in all of our buildings is perimeter security. So we've done a nice job as a district, and that predates me, so I'm not taking any credit for this, of providing perimeter security in all of our buildings. And we're not infallible by any means, but we've come a long way. We've got a ways to go. So part of the money would be used for that. Another part of the money, when I talk about equity, I'll go back to the vision that Superintendent Jack Teagan had and the Board of Education had in 1997, the last time we ran a bond issue. The bond issue was to make sure that all the buildings in the school system were equitable. So no matter what zip code you lived in, your child was going to have a quality school system, school district, school building to attend. And we want to continue that vision because it makes great sense for our community. So that's a piece of it as well. So that's the fourth component. All told, that adds up to $190 million. And it's hard for me to wrap my mind around $190 million until I drill down to say, what does it mean to me? The bond request would be for $190 million. The ballot issue would be for $190 million. But what does it mean for me? Of course, that's individualized. But here's how I would start to tell you to look at that. If you look at the median priced home in the city of Sioux Falls, the median assessed value home in the city of Sioux Falls, that home is assessed at just under $185,000. And remember, median isn't average, median's middle. So half of the homes in Sioux Falls are less than that assessed valuation. Half of the homes in Sioux Falls are greater than that assessed valuation. Well, that median priced home would have a $2 obligation monthly, $24 obligation annually for that increase. If you're wondering, well, what does that mean to me and in my home? Number one, we have a calculator on our website that you can go to. Plug in your assessed valuation. Don't plug in what you think your house is worth. Plug in what it's assessed at. And for every $100,000 of valuation that your house is, you'll take that number approximately times $1.08, and you can come up with what will it cost you. I was sitting in a crowd like this one time, and somebody says, well, what is a $500,000 home? What's that going to cost? $5.40 a month. $1.08 times every $100,000 of assessed valuation that you have. So I've had a couple of times people say, well, Brian, our property taxes are too high, and I wouldn't begin to debate that. I know this. I know that that's the methodology that's described for us to fund our school system. Whether that's fair or unfair is, I think, a conversation for a different time. It's a great conversation to have, but it's a conversation for a different time. So then I think the conversation really is, well, how reasonable have you been in terms of stewards of the tax dollar? And I think that takes a little bit of a history lesson to look at. I would tell you that in 2002, again, far before I got here, in 2002, the school district started looking at the house of an employee that they thought was a typical house in the city of Sioux Falls. And that person still works for the school district, and they've given us their tax statement every year since 2002. So for the last 16 years, we've been able to chart the property tax increases on that house. On that house, their property taxes in 16 years has gone up a total of 10.6%, or 0.6% annually since 2002. I would also say when you look at property taxes, I think you need to disaggregate what makes up property taxes. It's not just the school district on your property tax statement. There's also a city component. There's also a county component. And I'm not here to bash the city or the county, because I believe they've been good stewards of our money as well. But I would tell you that we have the slowest growth in terms of property taxes by quite a ways versus the city and the county. So again, that's not to bash, but I believe that's at least some evidence of how the district has been stewards of your money over time. The next thing that I would say, I'm probably forgetting a few things from what I've had to from what I've had to say so far. I'm probably forgetting a couple of items, but maybe I would just open it up at this point and tell you also that on. Here's one other piece in terms of the taxing structure. There are 11 school districts in Lincoln and Minnehaha County. If we look at the taxes of those school districts in Lincoln and Minnehaha County, currently we are 11th out of 11 in terms of what we levy for property taxes. Now, part of that is because of our size, and we can spread that money over a larger number of taxpayers. But the fact of the matter is, we have the lowest levy in Lincoln and Minnehaha County from a school district perspective. If we would pass our bond issue and no school district would change their current levy, we would only rise to 10th. We would be 10th out of 11 in terms of school districts in Lincoln and Minnehaha County. I suspect, I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect after everybody changes their levy for the coming school year, even if we would pass the bond issue, I suspect we would still be 11th out of those 11 school districts. I'm not here to convince you that the school is good stewards of your tax dollars, but I provide those two pieces of evidence to suggest that over time, the school district has been good stewards of your tax dollars. So with that, I'll wrap it up and say the vote is on September 18th. The voting threshold in the state of South Dakota for passing a school bond referendum is 60%. That's a heavy lift, and I think I would encourage you to get out and vote on September 18th. I'll open it up to any questions in the room. I'm gonna go right back here because she's waited patiently for a long time.
So I had a comment first, just, school, people might be wondering, well, why didn't you save some money along the way when you had more higher student enrollment, but you can't bank money. I mean, schools are told not to bank money by the legislature. So in case people were wondering that's why you didn't save money for this. But the question I had was concerning the high school and an opportunity where we see this new technology growth in the Northwest Quadrant, and if there's any businesses or economic development, business development that could partner with a new school and make it state-of-the-art, in technology, STEM. Are there some ideas that can be thrown around? Not that it would only do that, but we look to our European models and we see the arts focus in certain areas, and it's maybe there's opportunity because open enrollment at a high school level, kids can drive around. So it's, you know, some of these things that, these just, I guess, focuses as we develop our students, or is that something that you're looking at?
Yeah, we need to get you on a task force. And I would also tell you that we've had conversations just like the one that you had in this new high school, and we're wondering, we've got new technology, so we've got 4 high schools. So many times that we have the 3 traditional high schools, Lincoln, Washington, and Roosevelt. We also have New Technology High School, which is a project-based learning high school. It's a phenomenal high school. In many ways, I think it's one of the best kept secrets in our school system. But we're wondering, is there something that can be done there? We've talked about financial literacy, or STEM. I was invited to a STEM summit in Washington, D.C. earlier this summer. Is there a potential to get a partner, to have a wing to do some of the things that we're doing at CTE in a particular high school? We've had a lot of those conversations. The good news is, even if a bond issue passes and even if we build a new high school, we're 3 years out, so we can have more of those conversations. But we've wondered, does the high school of the future look like the high school of today? Or does it look different? And are there opportunities for our kids? Are there opportunities for funding through that? Good question. One other thing you addressed was the cap we have on our reserves. I think that's a great point. And through the Blue Ribbon Task Force, we put caps on reserves based on school size. And I would tell you that we're well under what the cap is that we have. And we try to stay at 8.5% as a school district, which is less than half of what we could have if we wanted to have, because we don't want to put your money in a savings account. And so we try to stay at that 8.5% reserve in the school system. That's a really good point. This time I won't cut you off.
I cut people off all day. I'm curious about the median. Now, is the median now cemented in at 185,000? Is that saying 30 years from now that 185, that won't be the median then? It'll continue to go up. As that median goes up, will it still remain at $2?
No, that's a good question. So the $2, what does it cost me when it passes? It costs me $2. And the median, the assessed valuation median today, if you didn't hear the question, was, is that a fixed number or will that float? That will float with housing values in the city of Sioux Falls. So it could go up or it could go down. But if I was a betting man, I'd bet on it going up and not down. So that certainly will go up. With that, the assessed valuation will be run through the algorithm with the levy that's also required, and that'll change. Here's the other thing that I would say. That'll change, your whole tax burden will change based on the changes in valuation, but certainly that piece will matter as well. Way back in the corner.
I'm asking if you have a plan B. What happens and at what cost? What will the cost be if we don't act on this now? What could we tell? And I'm running for office. I'm going to be knocking doors. When I talk to people and they, and I would say, I'd like you to support the bond issue. They might say to me, why now? Why do I have to bother with it right now? So typically, if we don't fund something now, we pay for it later.
It's a really good question. So the question really is, what's plan B if the bond issue does not pass? I've been really cautious to not use any scare tactics throughout the process, because I just think the data is what the data is, and I trust the intellect of the community to say yes or to say no, and then we react on September 19th based on what this community says. My job exists solely because we have a community with kids in it that need educated. That's the only reason I have a job, period. So on September 19th, the purpose for me is to say, okay, the bond issue passed, now what? Or the bond issue failed, now what? One of the things that we get conversation on is, what if the bond issue passes, are we going to have to redo boundaries for kids who attend the high schools, middle schools, and the elementary schools? And the answer is yes. Well, what about if the bond issue fails? We're going to have to redo boundaries. no matter whether the bond issue passes or fails. So that's something we're going to have to do regardless. The thing that happens if the bond issue fails, or one thing that doesn't happen if the bond issue fails, it doesn't change the capacity limits in our building, and it doesn't change the enrollment that we have either already here or coming in the future. So we'll have to figure out how to house those students. One recommendation we got quite a while ago was to put down affordable units outside of our schools. And I thought that was such a horrible scare tactic. We just dismissed that immediately. Would we use those if we didn't pass a bond issue? I don't know, but it would be a last resort. So I don't want to tell anybody that if this bond issue fails, the sky is falling and this will happen. Here's what I will tell everybody. On September 19th, whether the bond issue passes or fails, what you see in our classrooms will not change from what was happening there on September 18th or September 17th. We're going to do the best we can as a community to educate kids. So without using any scare tactics or what if, I know on September 19th, we've got to figure out what our plan is, whether the bond issue passes or fails. So that's my answer. That's the one I'm using. I'm not here to say we're going to do X or Y or Z, whether it passes or fails. We're going to do the best we can either way. Yes.
I'm just wondering why you think the bond issue passes. Why would it take 3 years to build a school? If you got land, and then you got money, and then you got, I don't know, if 3 years seems like a long time, and then if I was parent of one of the children, and they were brought up to schools, I sure as heck don't want to know. Is that a holiday? I mean, if you got land and then you have money, why is it getting a little sooner?
That's a great question. That seems like eternity to me too. And I'll tell you that I've been through this before, and here are a couple of things. One of the things that I did very early on was we had a number of architectural firms that wanted to meet with us, and we met with any of them that wanted to meet with us. We talked to them about what this looks like, and I think from we have not hired an architectural firm or will be until and unless the bond issue passes. It takes a lot of work to design and develop a 300,000 square foot building. It takes a long time for that design to develop. So that's a good chunk of what we would be talking about here. We don't have land purchased at this point. So that would be another thing that we'll
What
do.
do you say for land houses before?
True. We will vet that land, and you've heard my story on that. We'll move on that as quick as we can. I promise you, if we be in by 2021, we will, but it's ambitious. It really is. Each architectural firm that we've met with, as they come talk to us, two things. The one I told them, the second I asked them. The first thing I told them is that I think it's our job to create a level playing field for all architectural firms to come in and bid this project. I wasn't expecting that. That's what you should expect me, right? That's what you should expect. Hopefully when we're done, if that passes, hopefully when we're done, that'll be people will say that's been the case. But each firm then, so the question that I ask them then is, how long do you think it will take us to be in the building? And 3 years was the minimum. So I don't think it's politics. There weren't any politicians in the room. These were people who really want the job if it's available. And I just think 3 years is. I think it's going to be at least 3 years. If it was elementary school, I think it would be much quicker. A middle school, maybe quicker. A high school, I think it's going to take. A high school the size of the school we need, I think it's going to take 3 years.
Now,
2021, at this is soonest. So 3 years from now.
But you're looking at when the school year starts.
Yeah. Remember, we start school next week.
I guess two questions. First one is, How do we know this is gonna be $190 million? We haven't redistricted, we haven't purchased land, and we haven't done design work. So it kind of sounds like me, these numbers be pulled from somewhere. But if you don't know what the architectural engineering, you don't know how much land costs, you don't know where school is going, that's the first question. And my second question is about process here. I don't think it's a little unfair to have a $190 million bond issue and not have all the precincts in this city and school district to be used. I think a special election with 13 precincts is frankly ludicrous when we're gonna pass a $190 million bond issue. I think that every voter in this town should have the opportunity to be close to a vote center. And then to hand count it and not use the tabulation system, that's very troubling for me. So those are my two questions.
Great. Two questions. The first one was all the unknowns that go into the $190 million. Is that fair?
Yep.
So, great points. Here's one way that I would begin to answer that question. And that is the head of our operational services, Jeff Kreider, is an architect by trade. He has a lot of contacts in the industry. Also, we can look at comparables from buildings that have been built in the last year or the last two. I think we can get some really hard numbers there that we can look at inside of that. Also, we know what land is going for. We know what folks are offering us for land, so we can get a really good estimate, albeit an estimate. We can get a really good estimate of what those costs are to purchase land. The construction costs vary wildly year to year, but I would also tell you that in every facilities building that I've been a part of, there's always opportunity put in there for escalation and also for change orders. So I really think that the $190 million is a reasonable figure that was arrived at from a lot of folks a lot smarter than me putting together numbers. But I think your question is valid. There are a lot of unknowns here. How do you ever figure that out? The question on not having an architectural team in advance was one that we wrestled with a lot. Do we have that team in advance of an election, or do we wait? And we thought that our election was so public that at least all of the local architectural firms are very familiar with it. I think we'll get a great response. I think you'll have to sharpen your pencil as an architectural firm because it truly, we're gonna compete for the best and the brightest and the most cost efficient in that. So to the best that I can sit here and talk to you, I think that piece has been handled really well. So that's my answer for question one. For question two, on the vote centers, it's a great question and one that we've wrestled with a lot. And what's the best methodology for getting out the vote? Here's what we went back to, and there's pros and cons both ways. Here's what we went back to. How do we handle school-specific elections when we have those? It's not like we ever have those. We have those essentially every other year. And so what we settled on was handling the election next week the way we've handled all of the elections that we have in the past. I say there's pros and cons. Well, what are they? The pro that you described is if I'm voting in a general election, and I'm voting in, I'll say most elections, certainly over half of the elections, that's how I vote. I get comfortable going to where I vote. Why wouldn't we continue that? It's more convenient. That's the pro there. The pro to doing it the way that we've described is that you can vote at any one of the vote centers. You don't have to go to the one vote center. So if you're out and about in the community, you can vote at any vote center, not just the one. The second method is cheaper than the first method, but quite frankly, if we were just going for cheap, we would have done it at the general election. So this isn't about just doing it the cheapest way. Again, I can tell you that issue of how do we set up the election in a fair way, I personally wrestled with that as much as I did in any of the things. And there have been many difficult decisions, but that's the toughest one. And how do we get out the vote? How do we make it most convenient for our voters? That's been a tough one. And I'm very respectful of that question. Are we out of time? I will stay. We'll do one more question, and it will be the Mr. Borkman supporter. But I will stay for any questions that you have. I'll stay here and answer them as long as you'd like me to. Yes.
With the needs of the kids, why can't you just use the same blueprints for like the schools that have already been built?
Yeah.
I mean, instead of going through all this crap of hiring an architect and all that kind of stuff, why can't they just use, like, for Washington High School, make another Washington High School? For the middle schools, just use the one.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Why can't you just do that?
We can to an extent. It's a great question. It really is. So you think of Washington and Roosevelt, they're essentially the same footprint.
Yeah.
They were built 1 year apart. So 1992 was the last time we entered into a new high school. So if we get in 2021, there's quite a span of time there. There would be some improvements in just construction technology and delivery, the methodology, the pedagogy that goes on. So there would be some upgrades. But I think you would see a new high school that is very similar to Washington and Roosevelt. If a middle school is built, I will tell you that it'll look a whole lot like McGovern, because McGovern we've only been in for 5 years. So I think the greater length of time that we are away from a previous design, the more likely that design is to change. For example, we're not going to build a new high school like Lincoln High School. You know, it was built in 1965. So there would certainly be some upgrades. But I think there would be some efficiencies to be gained by looking at the blueprints used for Washington and Roosevelt. At the high school, definitely at the middle school, to use the efficiencies that can be gained by looking at the McGovern blueprint. And at the elementary level, looking at the efficiencies that can be gained by using the design that was Susan B. Anthony was built, without a doubt. Good question. I will stay.
Just a minute.
I'll stay as long as you want.
I have one question.
Everyone likes to vote early, and I find out that we can start voting already Monday. Where do we go to vote?
You can vote Monday at 7:30 a.m. at the Instructional Planning Center, 201 East 38th.
Okay, well, that's what I was wondering, because I knew it wasn't the courthouse, you know, so, because that's where I usually go.
So every day has to be Instructional Planning Center?
Monday through Friday, except for Labor Day. Monday through Friday at the Instructional Planning Center. You can come down and vote.
Saturday?
There is a Saturday vote, and I don't remember the date. Saturday, September 8th.
Tom,
Thank you.
Tom, can I make one quick comment? Very quick. Very quick. I attended all of that facilities task force. I attended all of those meetings as a member, not the smartest person in the room by any stretch. I was amazed at the level of conscientiousness that was brought to the process, how repeatedly people kept coming back in our discussions over and over and over that we needed to be mindful of spending taxpayer money. I can't express, Dr. Maher did a great job of encapsulating kind of all the discussions we had. I would suggest everybody here, if you can take 8 hours out of your month to, I don't know, binge watch half a season of Orange is the New Black or something, I would highly suggest taking those 8 hours instead and going and watching the videos of the task force meetings, because all the questions you have here, you're going to see the process by which those were arrived at, and you're going to see all the information that was presented there, and it was a phenomenal experience. I suggest everybody watch those videos.
Let's give him a hand.
We don't come up here to entertain you. We come up here to inform you.